We got a great guest for you guys now. His name is Ross Hammond. He's the coordinator of the Dirty Energy Money campaign, and they've sent a letter to Congress. We're going to tell you all about that. Ross, how are you, man?
Good. How are you, Cenk?
Fantastic. First, before we get to the letter, tell us what the Dirty Energy Money campaign is.
Yeah, so the Dirty Energy Money campaign, it's a coalition of state and national groups that are trying to confront and reduce the political influence of the fossil fuel industry in Congress. Godspeed
and good luck. They are getting a tremendous.
We have our work cut out for us.
You do indeed. They get a tremendous amount of subsidies. Tell us how much they get over a 10-year time period.
Yeah, so we just sent a letter, as you mentioned, to the Super Congress, listing out a number of subsidies and tax breaks that these corporations get. The total is $122 billion over 10 years.
So let's break that down for a second, Ross, because I've heard the number 40 billion, I've heard the number 70 billion, and now you're saying 122 billion. How do we arrive at that number?
Well, so this is a combination. This includes oil, coal, and gas, and it includes a number of different tax breaks and tax credits. One of the things that we highlighted in our letter was the whole issue of royalty-free leases. So currently, we have oil companies drilling on public lands, making billions of dollars of profit on those lands, and the taxpayer gets nothing. So ending those royalty-free oil and gas leases, for example, would save taxpayers about $9.5 billion over 10 years.
Well, okay, so that's really important. Let's focus on that for one quick second here. So where do they get to drill where they should pay royalties, and how much should they pay, and they don't pay right now? Tell me about this. Is it just Gulf of Mexico? Is it other places? Is it all of Gulf of Mexico or just parts? Which one is it?
No, it's in different parts of the country. There are parts of the country where they're not paying royalties on these lands.
And so, like, if, for example, other countries, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, I imagine they charge royalties, and normally we're supposed to charge royalties. Do you know what what percentage we're supposed to charge and where we're charging zero?
I don't have that exact figure, no, Cenk. But I think the point is that through all their campaign donations to Congress, they're able to maintain this sort of these special privileges which other companies don't have.
Yeah, and Ross, didn't these subsidies start out as a way to help a nascent industry when, for example, the oil industry was in its infancy and they wanted to encourage it to grow? And it has grown. Didn't a lot of these start decades ago?
That's correct. Yeah, some in the beginning of the century, in the teens and 20s. And so obviously these were for nascent industries, and clearly now they're very mature companies. They're multinational companies. They make billions of dollars in profits every quarter. So what we're saying is that they simply do not need or deserve these kind of handouts anymore.
They certainly don't need them to support the industry. As you point out in your letter here, over the last 10 years, just the top 5 oil and gas companies made $1 trillion in profits. That's not even a revenue, in profits. $1 trillion. How in the world could especially Republicans justify the government intrusion, giving away taxpayer dollars to these oil companies that are obviously already so profitable?
Right. Well, it's a pretty twisted logic, Cenk. I think, but really, what it really comes down to is this whole debate. It's about campaign cash and what members of Congress owe their campaign donors, plain and simple. And it's essentially a system of legalized bribery, right? So here you are, there's a fossil fuel industry. It gives millions of dollars in campaign cash to members of Congress. In return, those same politicians, they give our tax dollars to these industries in the form of subsidies and other tax breaks. They protect these companies from proper oversight, and they block measures that would help America transition to a clean energy economy. So for tens of millions of dollars in campaign contribution, they get billions of dollars back in subsidies and tax breaks, and that's what I would call a pretty great return on their investment.
So, but in a situation like that where we allow them to buy our politicians, basically, and they get such a great return on investment on those politicians, it seems to me that the only solution is not necessarily going after the fossil fuel companies, et cetera, but a change in campaign finance reform so that they can't buy our politicians anymore.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, the companies are a symptom of the problem, right? Ultimately, politicians have the power to regulate or not regulate them. And the fact that they're not regulating them, the fact that they're continue to give these handouts, shows the power of the campaign cash. And you're absolutely right that until there is proper campaign finance reform in this country, this will be a continuing problem.
So, Ross, who signed this letter, and what is the specific intent of this specific letter?
So this letter, like I said, this was to the Super Committee, to the Super Congress. It was signed by a whole range of national and state organizations, the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, Oil Change International, which hosts the Dirty Energy Money campaign, Public Citizen, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, and then you have groups that work on sort of environmental justice, Ella Baker Center, Green for All. You have citizen action groups around the country from Connecticut and Iowa. So it's a very, very diverse, it's not just environmental groups, it's a very diverse group of citizens organizations around the country who are demanding that these sorts of handouts end. Because, we're looking at an enormous budget deficit, and we're trying to figure out a way to solve the budget deficit, and there's no reason that we need to be continuing to give these handouts to these incredibly wealthy corporations.
So I got to ask you, do you think it's going to work? I mean, because understand that this is the one time that they're going to go to cut, trillions of dollars from the budget. If they don't cut this, which is the most obvious thing in the world to cut, if you're a rational human being, it doesn't matter, conservative, liberal, libertarian, it doesn't matter. This is the very first thing you would cut, right? If they don't cut this, and the Democrats agree to not cut this, does it become, in terms of fighting the specific issues, a little hopeless that, in fact, the only possible thing we could do is campaign finance reform? Otherwise, it's just, there's no way that logic is ever going to win.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I agree. I mean, I think, obviously, if we all just sit back and get depressed about it and think that it's hopeless, it is hopeless. But, these guys do always have to go back to the voters. They have to get reelected. And so if voters hold them accountable, when these guys go home and they have town hall meetings and they get continually peppered with questions from their constituents, I think there is hope. I mean, look, I worked on tobacco for a long time, and if you had asked people working on tobacco 30 years ago, could you ever sort of rein in the power of the tobacco industry, they would have laughed at you. They would have told you they give too much money, they get too much assistance from the government. But people rose up and they went after their politicians for taking this dirty money. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with this campaign, is to really ramp up the pressure on members of Congress to stop taking dirty energy money.
That's a great point, and it is really encouraging, because the tobacco companies had tremendous political power, and ultimately they did wind up losing, right? But those, I think, unfortunately, those were slightly different times. The power of money has gone up exponentially from 1980 to today, right? And I fear that if you had started that campaign against tobacco today, you'd probably run into that same brick wall. Now, that is, I don't want the audience to misunderstand. That is not me saying you get discouraged. It's just saying that if they don't cut the most obvious thing in the world here during their so-called Super Congress, where they're doing all these cuts, the corruption is not 98%. It's basically 100%, right? So then you've got to focus the fight. That doesn't mean you stop fighting. It means you've got to focus all of your energy and all of your fight into campaign finance reform. Otherwise, we're never going to get past that 100% corruption. That's all I'm saying, Ross.
Yeah, no, I have no disagreement with that whatsoever.
All right. Ross Hammond, fighting the good fight. He's the coordinator for Dirty Energy Money Campaign. Godspeed to you, Ross.
Thank you, Jack.